Thank you for joining me at Botanical Living with Kim. Today's video is going to be a gardening video, which is why I'm filming on my back patio near one of my gardens. So today I'm going to show you how I prepare for fall gardening. We'll discuss the importance of soil quality. I'll show you how I design and lay out my different beds, and then I'm going to show you a list of some vegetables that will grow really well this time of year. So stay tuned. Hello, and welcome back to Botanical Living with Kim. Working in the garden is one of my very favorite things to do. If you have existing beds that you planted over the summer, you're going to want to take the time now to clear those out. In my case, I have a lot of zucchini squash and tomatoes from the spring and summer season that are ready to go. And this is also the time to do any repairs or soil amendments that you need to do for the existing beds. If you're planning to start a new bed, now is the perfect time to get that constructed. And don't forget, as you're planning, you're going to think about different things like sun location, and you're going to want to make sure you add plenty of well composted organic soil. I will do a future video on composting, but you can purchase ready-to-use soil at local nurseries or in bulk from a landscape supplier. And if you're lucky, you may be even able to get a truckload of planting mix for free. So you'll just want to check around. So let's talk planning your new garden. And this is the design phase. So first, you want to pick a good location. You want to survey your landscape, look around your yard, and decide, coming into fall, where's the location that will maximize sun exposure. So for me, I'm planning a new bed in my backyard. And second, you want to measure your new garden bed area. This will help you decide what kind of garden you want to create. Are you planning on digging down traditionally and going down 12 to 18 inches or even further and turning over all of that soil? Or are you planning on spacing out an area and using the square foot method where you don't actually have to dig at all? You just add a barrier layer and then you add, I believe, the recommendation is 6 to 8 inches of new soil and planting on that. Are you building a large raised bed? These are things you're going to want to think about as you plan a new garden space. Now, my new garden bed is going to be a raised garden bed. I've used reclaimed wood. I really like to try to find reclaimed items because that helps your money for gardening stretch a little further. So in this bed, I am using 2 by 12 inch lumber, and I've secured it with stakes. I lined the bottom of this entire area with a weed barrier cloth, and I actually sometimes plant with this weed barrier cloth in my other beds. I'll cut a hole in it and plant right through it. But in this one, I've lined the bottom with it, and I think a weed barrier is really important. You could also use something like cardboard if you wanted to. The idea here is to create a layer that will decompose over time, but in the meanwhile, it's going to choke out the light and therefore choke out weeds and grass and kill that undergrade. And then you add, in this case, I'm adding a good 12, 13 inches of great composted fresh soil to the top as my planting mix. And over the course of this fall and winter, I'll be able to use that, and hopefully it'll provide a good barrier, and the weeds and grass that were below that will die out. So now that your areas are ready for planting, it is time to decide what to plant and where is it going. I like graph paper. I like to lay everything out, and that way I can erase and move things around. I'm kind of methodical in my planting of the vegetable gardens. My flower gardens and my herb gardens are a little more rangy, but the vegetables I typically take the time to really plan out. And I know a lot of things that should companion with each other, and over time you will too. You'll just learn those things as you go. Sometimes I refer to a space chart if I really want to go with a square grid. I do like the space chart that Mel Bartholomew put out in his square foot gardening method, and I'll put a link down below to his book. It's a great reference to look at, and he's got some really neat ideas for space-saving gardens if that's something that would appeal to you. So I kind of know which plants I like to put together, and one of the biggest things is plant what you and your family are going to eat. There's no point in planting a huge crop of something that you really don't like to eat. So keep that in mind when you're planting. Some beds will be more formal, some beds will be looser, especially if you have things that ramble on a vine or on the ground. But the fun thing about gardening is that you get to choose and you get to make it your own. So once you lay out your designs, be sure to pick the plants for the season, and then you decide on whether you're going to plant seeds or transplants. I will add a PDF link down below to my planting chart. I designed a really nice planting chart that shows things that are good to plant in the spring and the fall, and so I'll put that down below for you. One of the funnest things about this time of year when you're picking your new garden is looking at seed catalogs. I have loved looking at seed catalogs ever since I was a little kid. And yes, your mind can go crazy and you may decide you need to plant 20 different varieties of tomatoes. Try to rein it in and plant what you're actually going to use in the space that you have provided. So sometimes I will start seedlings ahead of time. Sometimes I will buy transplants, and sometimes I direct sow the seeds right into the ground. For me, it really just depends on the type of crop I'm planning on growing and the timeline that I need it to mature in. Now, like I mentioned before, you want to plant what you eat. Last year, I planted some broccoli, a small portion of broccoli, but it was absolutely delicious, and my husband loved it. And he could not believe we grew this amazing tasting broccoli at home. So this year, I'm planting a much larger section of broccoli. One thing you also want to remember is anything you plant that's going to trellis or vine, plant that on the edges of your bed unless you're doing some sort of a teepee focal structure in the middle. Otherwise, plant them on the edges so that you can trellis things up. Like behind me, there's a trellis growing. This is a permanent structure that I have year round, but you can see on it right now, I don't know if you can see them or not, but my cantaloupe decided to grow up that trellis, and I was really excited by that because I normally have passion vine growing on there in the spring, but the cantaloupe took over. So I've still got a few cantaloupe hanging on there, and I've made little slings to support them. But this is a really sturdy trellis. The wire itself is like cattle wire, that hog mesh, and then it's 4x4s in the ground. So whatever you choose to put your trellis system as, make sure it's sturdy enough to support the weight of your plant so that it doesn't collapse mid-season. The final step in planning your fall garden is water. So you need to decide, how are you going to water your garden? Are you going to use drippers? Are you going to use a soaker hose? Are you installing a manual or an automated irrigation system? Are you going to use a watering can, the hose? Whichever you decide totally is fine. But in my garden, the proximity of the garden to the water source is a factor at my home garden. Now, one of the gardens that I take care of elsewhere has a very elaborate system, and that's wonderful. And for those that can afford that, I would highly recommend automating your entire garden system, but it's not always practical. So in my home, I have a combination of different things. Some of my garden areas I use soaker hoses in, and that is a long hose. They're porous, and the water seeps out throughout the distance of the hose, and it slowly saturates an entire ground area. So I really like using soaker hoses in my herb gardens. They seem to do really well with that method of watering. Some other parts of my garden, I'm actually installing a new system in my new beds and in one of my existing larger beds, where I'm just going to have a hose with drip nozzles spaced throughout it, and that will be attached to a spigot in my backyard, and I'm going to put an automated little timer on that so it can water at different times of the day. Especially that'll be great when I'm traveling and I'm out of town. There's always the old standby with a regular hose, and my husband actually really enjoys hand watering in our garden. So that's, sometimes people think that's a really therapeutic thing to get outside and use your hose, and that's great a lot of the time, as is watering with a watering can. I have a lot of little pots up under my patio, and those, it works great to use a watering can for. I don't need a system. I can't really have a system hooked up to pots. And then of course, like I mentioned, there's the automated systems where you have an entire irrigation system hooked up, and those are wonderful because there's a clock, everything's automated, it's hooked up to electricity, and so it's going to water at a consistent time every single day for a consistent duration, and you can really monitor that and hone it in and see how your plants are doing with it. But the bottom line is you need to do what works for you in your situation. Well, I hope you have a really good idea on how to plan for your fall vegetable garden. One thing I wanted to mention too, consider adding some flowers to your garden. Not only are they really pretty and add splashes of color, but they encourage pollinators into your garden, like bees, and we need bees, and butterflies and different things like that will help your vegetables grow better. And then some of the flowers are edible too, so that's a nice added perk. Please take a second to click the subscribe button down below and also give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. If you have any questions on gardening or any positive comments to share, I would love to read those, so please feel free to place those down below in the comments section. I encourage you to share my videos, and I encourage you to start a vegetable garden if you haven't already done so. The next videos I have coming up in the garden series will be actually planting the garden, and I'm also going to be making one on composting. So stay tuned, those will be coming up really soon. So thanks again for watching, and I wish you happiness and health and a beautiful day. Take care. Bye-bye.